James Carter was just resetting his Wi-Fi password when the police showed up. His neighbor, Linda, had called 911, claiming he was doing something suspicious. But what started as a false accusation quickly turned into a shocking revelation, one that exposed a hidden danger lurking in their quiet suburban neighborhood. James Carter, a software engineer, enjoyed the peace and privacy of his suburban home in Maplewood, Missouri. He mostly kept to himself, working from home and tending to his garden. His life was simple, predictable, and exactly the way he liked it. One Thursday afternoon, he noticed his internet was lagging more than usual. Video calls were buffering, streaming music was choppy, and downloads crawled at an irritatingly slow pace. Frustrated, he opened his router settings, expecting to see his usual list of connected devices. Instead, he spotted something unusual, a device labeled Maplewood Hub 01. James frowned. He lived alone, and every device in his home was accounted for. He wasn't in the habit of sharing his password, so the idea that someone else had access to his network was unsettling. Without hesitation, he removed all unknown connections and reset his Wi-Fi password, ensuring that only his personal devices could access the network. For better signal strength, he stepped outside onto his driveway, his fingers moving swiftly across his phone screen. Unbeknownst to him, his neighbor, Linda Matthews, watched from her kitchen window. Linda had always been skeptical of James. He rarely attended neighborhood gatherings, never made small talk, and kept to himself far more than she deemed normal. She peered closer, watching him stand there, staring at his phone. He seemed focused, serious, too serious. Her thoughts spiraled. What if he was hacking, stealing information, or worse, plotting something sinister? Her gut told her something wasn't right. Without a second thought, she grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report something suspicious," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "My neighbor is outside, messing with his phone. He's up to something. I just know it." The dispatcher asked for details, but Linda had none. Still, the officers were dispatched. James, completely unaware of the growing storm, finished updating his password. Just as he put his phone away, he heard the sharp wail of sirens in the distance. Within moments, a squad car rolled to a slow stop in front of his house. Two officers stepped out, scanning the scene with assessing eyes. His quiet afternoon was about to turn into something much bigger. Detective Robert Navarro and Officer Grace Carter approached with caution, their eyes scanning the scene. James Carter stood in his driveway, phone in hand, his face marked with confusion. "Sir," Navarro called out, resting his hand near his belt. "We received a call about suspicious activity. Can you tell us what you're doing?" James frowned, his brows knitting together. "Suspicious? I'm changing my Wi-Fi password." Navarro exchanged a glance with Carter. "Do you live here?" James almost laughed, the absurdity of the question clear. His car was parked in the driveway. His name was on the mailbox. "Yes, 3 years now." Before the officers could respond, Linda Matthews stormed out of her house, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and self-righteous determination. "He's lying. He's always outside, sneaking around. Now he's been standing there for 10 minutes, tapping away on his phone. That's not normal." James exhaled sharply, trying to keep his temper in check. "I was on my router settings because someone unknown was using my Wi-Fi." Navarro turned to Linda, his voice calm but firm. "Do you have any evidence he's done something illegal?" Linda hesitated, her mouth opening and closing before she stammered, "I just have a bad feeling." Navarro sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. He turned back to James. "Would you mind showing us your router settings?" "Just to clear this up." James clenched his jaw. He didn't have to comply, but he knew refusing might make things worse. With a reluctant sigh, he unlocked his phone. Fine. Here. Navarro leaned in, scanning the list of connected devices. His expression shifted, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "What's this?" he muttered, pointing at a device labeled Maplewood Hub 01. James shook his head, his stomach tightening. "Not mine." Carter, now intrigued, asked, "Can you check the connection logs?" James tapped his screen, scrolling through the data. His breath caught in his throat. "This device has been running for weeks, accessing camera feeds." Silence settled over the group like a thick fog. Linda paled, her voice shaky. "Camera feeds?" James's eyes darkened. "Someone has been watching. And not just me, our entire neighborhood." A chilling realization settled over them, an unspoken weight pressing down on the room. The casual accusation against James had unraveled into something much more sinister. Navarro's stance stiffened. "Let's go inside. I want to see exactly what's going on." James led them into his house, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He set his phone on the table and mirrored its screen onto his laptop, bringing up the full activity logs. The room fell into a tense silence as they scanned the data. The device, Maplewood Hub 01, had been accessing live security feeds, not just from James's home, but from multiple addresses in the neighborhood. Each log showed timestamps, proving this had been going on for weeks, maybe longer. Officer Carter leaned in, her voice sharp. "Can you see where this data is being sent?" James's fingers flew across the keyboard. Within moments, his face darkened. "It's not being sent to a random server. It's going to an address right here in the neighborhood." Linda's breath hitched. "You mean someone nearby?" Her voice trembled, her mind racing through possibilities. James nodded, his expression grim. He cross-referenced the IP logs, tracing the connection back to its source. His stomach clenched as the address appeared on the screen. He recognized it instantly. Linda did too. Her skin went pale. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "That's my nephew's house." Brandon Matthews. A 22-year-old tech enthusiast, Brandon had moved in with Linda a few months ago. He was always in his room, glued to his computer, withdrawn from the world. She had dismissed it as youthful introversion. But now, a dark suspicion gnawed at her. Officer Carter's voice was firm, her tone leaving no room for debate. "We need to talk to him. Now." Linda hesitated, her face stricken with disbelief. Deep down, something in her gut told her this was true. She had accused James, but the real threat had been inside her own home all along. James pushed back his chair. "I'm coming too." Navarro held up a hand, his tone final. Let us handle this." James clenched his jaw, frustration flashing in his eyes. He wanted answers. He wanted to be there when the truth came out. But he knew better than to argue with the officers in this moment. "Fine," he muttered, "but get the truth out of him." They left, their steps heavy with the weight of what was coming. But the truth waiting for them was darker than any of them imagined. Linda's hands trembled as she led them to her house. The walk felt impossibly long, every step heavy with a dread she wasn't ready to face. Her breath came shallow as she reached the front door and hesitated before pushing it open. "Brandon," she called up the stairs, her voice unsteady. "Come down for a minute." Silence. Navarro and Carter exchanged a look. They stepped inside, their presence filling the space with an undeniable authority. Carter gestured toward the staircase. "Brandon Matthews, this is the police. Open the door." A long pause. Then a chair scraped against the floor. Slow, measured footsteps creaked against the old wood. The door at the top of the stairs cracked open just enough for a pale, nervous face to appear. His eyes darted between them, taking in the badges, the guns, the tight expressions. Navarro stepped forward. "We have reason to believe you've been accessing private security cameras. Explain." Brandon's fingers twitched at his sides. "That's crazy. I don't know what you're talking about." Carter didn't blink. "Mind if we check your laptop?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "You don't have a warrant." Navarro's tone was even, but firm. "We can get one. But right now, we're giving you a chance to tell the truth before things get worse." Brandon hesitated, his eyes flicking to Linda. She stared at him, wide-eyed, silently pleading for him to deny it, to prove this was all a mistake. But instead, he let out a slow, shaky sigh. "I didn't mean for it to get this far." Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Brandon, what did you do?" His gaze dropped to the floor. "It started as a joke," he mumbled. "I wanted to see if I could break into a network." Navarro's patience thinned. "So you admit you hacked into them?" Brandon swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "At first it was just Wi-Fi. But then, I saw the security cameras." He lifted his eyes, his expression a mix of fear and regret. "And I got curious." Carter's voice was sharp. Curious? Or obsessed? Silence. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Navarro's expression hardened. "How many people have you watched?" Brandon's voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know." Linda staggered back, gripping the edge of a chair for support. "Oh my God." The reality settled over her like a weight she couldn't shake. She had been so certain, so quick to accuse an innocent man. And all this time, the real danger had been under her own roof. Navarro stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "Brandon Matthews, you're under arrest for unauthorized access of a computer network and unlawful surveillance." Brandon's face drained of color. "Wait, no, Carter was already reaching for his wrist, snapping the cuffs into place with a practiced efficiency. Linda turned away, pressing a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. The weight of her mistake crushed her, leaving her breathless. James had been right all along, and she had called the cops on the wrong man. As Brandon was led away, his wrists bound in cuffs, his head hung low. The weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. Navarro secured him in the squad car before turning back toward James, his expression unreadable. "You were right," Navarro admitted, his voice carrying a rare note of acknowledgement. James exhaled, glancing between Brandon and Linda. He wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it any less frustrating. He had done nothing wrong, just a simple act of updating his Wi-Fi password. And yet, he had been the one who ended up under suspicion. His voice was calm, but carried an undeniable edge. "I was minding my business, changing my Wi-Fi password, and yet I was the one who got the cops called on me." Linda flinched, as if the words had physically struck her. She had no defense, no excuse that could undo the mistake she had made. The shame sat heavy in her chest. "I was wrong," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James studied her for a long moment before shaking his head. "I don't need an apology," he said, turning toward his front door. "Just do better." With that, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The night air was quiet, save for the distant hum of the squad car's engine. Linda stood in the middle of the street, her arms wrapped around herself, the weight of reality sinking in. She had been so sure, so quick to judge, and in doing so, she had accused the wrong man, while the real danger had been inside her own home. Assumptions have consequences. Be careful who you judge. Did this story surprise you? If you liked it, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, drop a 2 and let us know how we can improve.